there was a group of men here. I'd like to ask you about the Secret Seven. So it really wasn't just 7 African-American men. There were more than that, but there was a group called the Secret Seven,
Right.
and most of them, but not all, belonged to the Departmental Progressive Club here in Old Town. But not all. Your husband didn't belong. You and I discussed that. But regardless, these men got together for the purpose of ensuring.
They got together for the purpose of educating the people, informing the African American community about things that were going on in the community and how they could help.
Weren't they also an advocate for African American concerns to the leadership of the city?
Same thing.
Okay, so that if something happened, Carol Johnson told me that she can remember, she's probably in her early 60s, if that, and at most, and she said that she remembers her father, Mr. Johnson, getting phone calls sometimes very late at night, and she could hear him say, "I'll be there in 5-10 minutes." And that something had happened, and so the issues, that he could intercede on behalf of this young person, or that things like that were going on, and sometimes a community needs those voices, Ferdinand Day or your husband or Mr. What a difference those men obviously made in the relative peace of a time when this city and in this country when things were very full of strife, right?
They did. They would investigate, research, write papers, send out letters and whatnot to the community to let them know what was going on, who was doing what, and how the people in the community could interface with whatever they chose.
Were you ever nervous for your husband?
No.
Okay.
No. My husband was not a talker. He would know things, but he was not a gossiper. And maybe that's not the right word, but things that were supposed to be kept, he kept them. He didn't even share them with me. He was...
Well, it was the Secret Seven, so that he was on honor code.
Yeah, and that Secret Seven name was given in sarcasm, because I've heard them talk about some man who tried to infiltrate that group, and he was white too, so I don't know how he thought he could infiltrate, but he would try to hang out with them, and they always felt that he was an FBI informant.
And that's fascinating.
And he was the one that would say, "I don't know why you let these 7 men try to tell you what to do." He called them the Secret Seven, and that was sarcasm.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they obviously had an impact on the city. You've seen other things happen where the city, frankly, came to or went to the African-American community in Fort Ward Park, or into the neighborhood where T.C. Williams and Chinquapin are now, that area of the city, which were historically African-American communities for some 150 years. And then the people in my position as the mayor or the city manager or both went to the African-American community and said, "We want your land, you need to move on, and if you don't play nicely in the sandbox, we'll exercise eminent domain." And they threatened the African-American community. And as I said on the dais when we discussed the TC Lights issue, I mean, that was a promise made that every mayor in 40 years or more acknowledged and spoke about, the promise made that the lights wouldn't go up, right? If you all moved. But the city, as I understand it, bought the house for eminent domain pricing, not what I would call regular pricing, and then but never paid for the massive land around that house. And so, as I said on the dais, I apologized as the mayor on behalf of the city, and I said it was wrong, and I said that we basically stole your land, and I still believe that. I mean, we didn't pay for the land that we took. We only paid for where the property of the house was.
But then when the people were relocated there, they had to buy the land back.
Right. So they had to buy on Woods Place and Woods Avenue.
And then buy the house. Right.
Right. And so not everyone could do that, right?
Not everyone did. It took such a long time that many of the people moved to other areas. Right. But you know, all through the city, whenever the city wanted to do something big, it destroyed an African-American community. They put public housing across the street, and before the public housing was there, there was a single-family African-American community. You go all over town, right here at the corner, Ramsey.
So those 15 units
Those
will
units
be
are
there.
gone. When they first built those houses, they weren't public housing,
Right.
but then they eventually became public housing. So the public housing is gone. And granted, they bring some people back into them.
Well, it's my understanding, since that vote happened on my watch, that it's not just my understanding. It is those 15. If they wish to come back, there will be 15 units there for them to come back to, and so, and then in addition to that, there will be some affordable housing units as well. So it's a combination of public housing and affordable housing, and I don't know if it's 50 or 52 units, something like that. But those 15, in this particular case, it was really important that they be allowed, if they choose to come back, and I'm hopeful that most will choose to do so. But I don't know. I mean, but the building behind us, we've heard some of the construction while we're talking.
Yeah.
It's literally 20 feet behind us, but they're making great progress. So going back for a second to the TC lights, since that is an issue that you were deeply involved with and still are, is that something that, in terms of how you and Fran Terrell and Adrienne Washington and Carol Johnson and Armenta Wood and the Adams family, and the list is pretty long. Did it raise, that whole discussion remind you all of a time in terms, I mean, there was your contention and my understanding is that there was a promise made. That is what I was told by various mayors. That's what city managers had said. It was actually on the website.
We have never said that there was a written agreement. There was an oral agreement, and it has been honored for the last 40 or so years. There have been lights out there.
Like a temporary
but when
game, right?
Yeah, one time they did a Friday night lights game, but then they came to the community to be sure that we would accept them. And if there was no promise, why would they bother?
Right. That's an interesting point.
You know, they didn't have to say anything to us, but they did, because they know that there was agreement not to have lights out there.
Now, was your husband and Mr. Day and whoever else involved in negotiating that understanding and, I guess, handshake promise or whatever between the city and the African-American community?
I don't know that my husband was Melvin Miller,
Okay.
and Colonel Johnson were. Colonel Johnson was the president of the Civic Association out there.
Okay.
and Melvin Miller was one of the attorneys.
Okay. And speaking of civic associations, I just want to segue towards that a little bit. You've been deeply involved in the civic association, the Seminary Civic Association, as well as Seminary Hill Association. Both.
Seminary Civic Association is part of Seminary Hill, and Seminary Hill is made up of several civic associations.
And so you've lived here a long time. I know that Patsy Tyser, the former mayor, former state senator, who only passed away about 2 years ago now, obviously my dear friend, but she and I used to talk about, with Vola Lawson, our former city manager, the importance of civic associations. You've worked hand in glove with all these nonprofits and the civic associations of our city for a long time. And can you speak to that tradition here in Alexandria of that role that and why? And that those who were elected and the city management of the city depended upon, as I understand it. I mean,
well, I always felt that the city listened to civic associations and what they had to say, and would act in their best interests. It appears now that the city acts in the city council acts in its own best interest, regardless of what the community has to say. That's how I look at it.
okay.